Welcome to the Clarinet Podcast, the show about all that's new and neat with clarinet, with the neatest people in the industry. You can support the ongoing production of this independently produced program by donating to our Patreon at clarinet.com/support. Supporters get early access to extended ad-free podcasts and exclusive access to patron-only episodes and live events. And now for today's episode of the show, David Shifrin on Clarinet Celebration 2019.
The direction that I give to my students when they prepare degree recitals is to play something that you've played many times before and do it better, to play something that you've worked on but never performed, get it to the performance level, and to choose something that you've never studied.
One of only 2 wind players to have been awarded the Avery Fisher Prize, David Shifrin is in constant demand as an orchestral soloist, recitalist, and chamber music collaborator, and is also the artistic director of Chamber Music Northwest. Today we discuss the upcoming Clarinet Celebration and Competition in Portland, Oregon, why David prefers synthetic reeds, managing a music career as a parent, and some tips on planning an artistic, fulfilling, and yet also challenging recital program, both for the artist and the audience. I hope you'll enjoy today's episode of the podcast, and be sure to check out Chamber Music Northwest at cmnw.org. Today's episode was brought to you by the generous support of the following sponsors. Daddario Woodwinds has an exciting new weekly trivia show called Don't Blow It. You can check it out every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time on their Instagram channel, and if you know the right answers to the questions, you might even have the chance to win some amazing new gear. By the way, if you haven't had a chance to try Daddario's new reserve clarinet reeds, you're in for a real treat. They're using some really amazing new technology and manufacturing techniques that are helping achieve super consistent results. You can pick up a box at your local music store or head to clarinet.com/reeds to buy a box right now. Chamber Music Northwest is hosting an international clarinet celebration and competition from June 24th to 30th in Portland, Oregon. You can compete to win over $20,000 in prizes in the Young Artist Competition, take part in clarinet ensembles, masterclasses, and clarinet mentor amateur workshops, and enjoy concerts by world-class artists including Corrado Giuffretti and Jose Frank Ballester. Deadline for the Young Artist Competition is January 15th, and clarinetists age 30 or younger may apply. Passes to the Clarinet Celebration are on sale now, and you can learn more at cmnw.org. Hosting for Clarinet is sponsored by Bakun and their new line of Lumiere clarinets, barrels, and bells. Get 10% off your next accessory purchase by using code Clarinet at bakunmusical.com. So I'm here today with David Shifrin. David, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, I wanted to start out the conversation today, of course, by asking about your clarinet celebration, but about 15 minutes before we got on the phone here, I had my brand new Bakun Lumiere clarinet show up at the door, so I'm showing significant restraint, but it's probably good to leave it and let it warm up for an hour. But this is something I believe we both share. You upgraded to this clarinet recently as well. Is that true?
I did. I was playing on the mobile clarinet for a couple of years, and I was on one of my regular pilgrimages to Vancouver. There was this shiny new clarinet on Maury's desk, and he said, "You want to try something different?" And I did, and it was lovely, and I got my name on the wait list to get a set of Lumieres. And for me, it's just the right mix of depth in the sound and flexibility and ease of playing, and so it's never been more fun to play the clarinet than it is now with these Lumiere clarinets.
What did you get as far as woods and key selections and all that?
Cocobolo wood with silver keys.
What do you like about that Cocobolo wood?
Well, I feel I get a warmer sound. They're just different. I find that I have to warm the Cocobolo clarinet up a little bit longer before it really gets in the zone. But I find that once I do, it holds the pitch and stays really consistent for as long as I play it.
Well, I can't wait to try it out here. As far as the key work, is there what considerations do you put as far as is it the appearance or the tactile response of the key work? Or I remember Corrado Giuffretti had told me that he loved the gold simply for the way that it looks, but is there a reason you go with silver?
I like the way it looks. I don't really find a big difference. I had a MOBA with gold keys on a B flat for a while, and if I'm not looking at it, I can't feel the difference. Maybe others have more of a tactile sensitivity, but I really couldn't.
So this is a question here from Shane_clarinetist on Instagram, and it's very related to this current topic. What advice do you have for clarinetists on selecting a new instrument?
The two most important things are evenness of response and pitch. If you can play in tune and have an even response throughout the registers, there are all kinds of things you can do to produce the sound that you want with equipment, with tone production. But if the instrument doesn't respond evenly, and if it takes undue contortions to play it in tune, then there's really no chance of making music at the highest level. If you choose an instrument because you think it has a lovely tone, but the 12ths are really wide, or the low register is really flat, or the high register doesn't speak, but you really love that tone, you're asking for trouble. Every instrument is a compromise to play in tune. You have to adjust, and you have to adjust even with the best possible instrument, depending on where you're playing, who you're playing with, what key you're in, the function of the notes you're playing in, the harmony. You're always going to be adjusting for pitch. But starting with the octaves, 12th, 5th, 4th, that are in tune with itself really makes a big, big difference.
You also use synthetic reeds. What are the pros and cons, and why did you decide to switch to these?
As recently as maybe 3 years ago, I would bet very large sum that I would never be performing on plastic reeds. And it seemed like science fiction to me. For my entire career, I wished that there were plastic reeds or synthetic reeds that would be consistent and reliable. But I only really decided to try them because some players that I really admire sounded so good on them. I had invited both Ricardo Morales and Corrado Giuffredi to do guest master classes at the Yale School of Music where I teach, and was just knocked out with the ease that they played and didn't need to adjust their reeds or worry about it. And I thought, well, this is worth trying. So I ordered a few, and with kind of mixed results. It didn't work so well for me at first. And then I realized my mouthpiece was really set up for Van Doren V12 3 3/4, or whatever. What do they call 3.5 plus? I think in the Van Dorens, and none of the Leger reeds worked quite the same way on that mouthpiece. But then I tried a few different mouthpieces that. And that made all the difference, having the combination setup of the mouthpiece and the reed. And I experimented in a rehearsal at the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center. We were preparing a wind serenade concert, and I just went into a rehearsal one day and didn't mention to anyone that I was playing on a Leger reed. Afterwards, I asked the oboist I was working with, Stephen Taylor, if the reed that I was playing sounded okay to him, and if it seemed any different, or was having any trouble playing and blending and playing in tune with me that day. And he said, well, funny you should mention it. I thought it sounded especially rich tone and stable pitch. And so it sounds like a really good reed. I said, well, thank you very much. So I switched right then. I played the rest of the week and played all the concerts on it. And, I wavered a few months later, back and forth, when I was recording some chamber music. I thought, well, I should see if I can use my best cane reed. And I did one session on it, and I felt like I really need to go back to the Leger. And that was a couple of years ago. And now I've only performed on the plastic reeds. And this is not a paid announcement, by the way. It's just really such such a relief not to have to go through the whole ritual of breaking reeds in and working on them and worrying how long they're going to last, whether they'll make it through a Brahms sonata, all of those things.
Do you feel like, and this is a comment that I've heard from other guests on the podcast and people just in person, but there are a lot of people who feel that some element of the artistry of playing clarinet is lost when we give up on the cane reeds. Do you agree with that, or?
No, I don't really feel that. I feel like having a more reliable tone production source allows greater artistic freedom. I find that the timbre that I can achieve with the Leger reed is more even, but that I can vary it and do things with the voicing that give me all the colors that I ever was able to achieve with cane. I'll share another thing with you as well. The recording that I referred to, it's now out on Delos Records, and it's a CD of music of Carl Nielsen, including the chamber arrangement of the Clarinet Concerto, and a number of works for clarinet and piano, and the Serenata in Vano. And in the concerto, there were a number of takes of various passages throughout the session, and some of them I played on a cane reed, and some of them I played on the Leger reed. And I cannot tell, in listening to the edited version of the concerto. Actually, it was a performance with patches, and the performance I played on the Leger reed, and in the patch session the next morning I played on cane. And when I listened to the recording that's been based on the performance with patches edited in, I can't remember or tell where the edits are and where the performance is. And so it's edited back and forth between cane and Leger synthetic reeds. The tone quality, to me, it sounds like me. I can't tell which is cane and which is Leger. And none of the players that I was playing with could tell either.
Well, I guess that's the thing, right? If it feels correct and it sounds great, and even to a discerning ears like yours, if you can't hear the difference, then it's the way to go.
For me, I can't say that for everyone. I don't insist that my students play on any particular equipment either. I want them to play on whatever is going to work best for them, give them the ease of playing and the sound that they're looking for. And I've had students who've gone back and forth and tried the cane and Legers, and it's mixed. About half my students have switched to Leger, and some have gone back and forth. Some have, really felt more comfortable staying with cane. And I'm sure that's true for players at many different levels. I can tell you, my daughter, who's 13, plays the clarinet, and she started on cane reeds, and then I was really, really happy to switch her over to Leger and not have to worry about a young student dealing with breaking in and adjusting cane reeds.
Well, before we went on air here, we talked a bit about Barry Green, who, of course, wrote The Inner Game of Music and was recently on the podcast. And his equation for musical success, I guess, is performance equals potential minus interference. So if the reed is causing interference, whether that be interference preventing you from practicing because you're working on your reeds, or it's not working as well as it could, then it's going to decrease the outcome. So yeah, I think for a lot of players, especially young students, it might be a great alternative. Just get their mind off the reed and into the clarinet,
I completely agree with that. And yeah, you make a very good point that all that time trying to get the best cane reed, you could be spending actually practicing the instrument and the music. So yeah, it's a great development.
Absolutely. So speaking of practicing the instrument, I think that young clarinetists all around the world are going to want to get practicing, because this late spring, you are hosting, as part of the Chamber Music Northwest, a Clarinet Celebration and Competition for young players. Would you tell me a bit about this, sort of the who, what, where, when, why, and what to expect?
Sure. Well, the event in Portland, Oregon will be actually early summer, the very last week of June. But the competition begins now. We're in early January, and January 15th, 2019 is the deadline for the video round of the competition. The competition will take place at Portland State University in Portland, Oregon, and there will be events at Portland State as well as at Reed College in Portland. It's a combination, really, of a giant clarinet celebration, a week-long event with 20 or 25 guest artists from around the world. We'll be hosting a competition as well as concerts and master classes and symposia every day, all day at Portland. The competition begins with a video round. As I mentioned, the deadline is January 15th. And the repertoire was chosen in consultation with some of my colleagues and with my strong inclination to keep the repertoire list fairly compact and to have primarily really mainstream great masterpieces for the instrument. So my feeling is that some of the international competitions have such a vast repertoire list that it becomes a little bit too diffuse for the contestants to do their best work, because they're learning so much repertoire that it's really not their finest playing. But if we can concentrate on the real masterworks for the instrument, that it might be able to display the true artistry of each individual contestant. And I think it makes it more of a manageable task for the jury to make comparisons and hear the really outstanding artistry of a few individuals playing these works, which are, really accepted and clearly the gems of our repertoire. Now, for the final round, which will be in Portland, we're only going to choose 6 semifinalists, and each of those will have already won a prize. We're going to pay their way to Portland and $1,000 prize for making it to the semifinals and house them in Portland. The semifinals will be the same repertoire as the video round, with the addition of a commissioned work from a young composer named Daniel Temkin, who is a really incredible creative force. We did a work of his last summer at our festival in Portland, and I was so taken with that. I thought I'd want to give him an opportunity to write a piece that I know is going to be played by many, many people, and that would be something that would have to be learned on an even footing. The semifinalists will be selected in probably in early March, and will all be given the score at the same time for the work that they'll have to perform in June, along with the standard repertoire. In addition to the video round, those who get to the finals will play the complete Mozart Clarinet Concerto with piano, and the first movement of the Mozart Clarinet Quintet with the award-winning Ralston String Quartet, who will be in residence that week, in a combination of rehearsal, open rehearsal, and reading session, where they'll work with the quartet and then perform just the first movement of the quintet. The first prize winner will receive $7,500 prize and will perform the Clarinet Concerto with the festival orchestra twice, Mozart Concerto, as the culmination of the competition. And there will be a second prize and a third prize, and as I mentioned, even the fourth, fifth, and sixth place winners will each receive a prize. I've tried to make this the competition that I always wished the competitions I had gone to as a young player would have had, namely that if you are going to travel great distances to compete, that you will already have your expenses paid and that you've won a prize just by being invited to the live round. And two, that the repertoire is manageable. And the other element of this is that there will be about 20 jurors with really widely varying perspectives and styles. And I think that will, hopefully eliminate any appearance of or actual bias towards a particular style. And of course, those of us who are students who are performing or people that we've worked with extensively will excuse ourselves from voting on those players. So we try to make it as objective a process as possible. And we'll have artists from all over the world, from France, from China, from Japan, from Australia, on the jury, and from Italy as well. Corrado Giuffredi will be there. Fan Lei and He Yi will be there from China. Brooke Tan will be there, who's in, I believe, in Tokyo now. We have many leading clarinetists from the United States and Canada. We've got Jose Frank Ballester, who's a Spanish clarinetist who's now teaching at the University of British Columbia. Romy de Guise-Langlois, who's originally from Montreal, is now living in New York and teaching at the University of Massachusetts. Jazz players like Ken Poplowski, and a great player like Mark Dover, who's a great jazz player and is also the clarinetist in the Imani Winds. Players from symphonies around the country, including Laura Arden, the principal from the Atlanta Symphony, and Ben Lulich, principal of Seattle, the entire clarinet section of the Oregon Symphony, recording artist Sung-Hee Lee. I'm only mentioning a few of them. I'm very proud that my teacher, Fred Ormond, will be with us on the jury. I really think that we're going to have an amazing event, and looking forward to hearing all of these young artists. And I hope that we'll have many people who will come for the event to hear them, but also to hear the concerts that we'll be presenting every night that will feature all of the jury members. Have Corrado and Jose performing, and Chad Burrow from the University of Michigan. Aude Camus is coming from Rouen, France. She's also happens to be the director of the Lancelot competition, which is I think a semi-annual competition now that takes place in various locations around the world. That started in the hometown of Jacques Lancelot in Rouen, France, where she's on the faculty of the conservatory. The concerts will feature Mozart as the centerpiece, that will be doing, the quintet for the clarinet and strings, but also more unusual repertoire, the fragment for quintet that was completed by Robert Levin in the movement in B flat major. The Adagio for 2 clarinets and 3 basset horns, the Notturne for 3 basset horns and 3 voices. But the concerto, of course, will be performed by the competition winner on the same program with a really amazing group of artists performing the Grand Partita. So we'll have 4 of our clarinetists in that with some of the leading wind chamber musicians at the festival. In addition to that, of course, there'll be a program of cutting-edge clarinet, all premieres and new works for the clarinet. We'll have a jazz evening with Ken Poplowski and his quartet, an evening of all virtuoso works, including a couple of premieres, a brand new Bela Kovacs arrangement of UNESCO Romanian Rhapsody that is for two clarinets and piano that I'll be playing along with Corrado Giuffredi. All kinds of really unusual and traditional repertoire during that week. And then we'll have some really exciting clarinet ensembles and clarinet choir. We'll do a concert that'll have live performance of Steve Reich's New York Counterpoint, Peter Schickli's Monochrome for 9 clarinets, a brand new piece by Nicola Mangani for a large clarinet ensemble that I asked him to write based on themes of Mozart, which will be a set of variations where each variation will feature a different luminary clarinetist. We'll be playing Piazzolla for clarinet choir and Villa-Lobos Pachianas Brasileiras number 5 for clarinet ensemble. And we're going to end the whole clarinet choir evening with a full clarinet choir playing Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor. You know, think Leopold Stokowski and Fantasia, but with the uniformity of the clarinets from the contrabass clarinet up to the E flat, playing a Bach Toccata and Fugue.
So we're going to have this week-long event and feature 24 of my favorite clarinetists and host a major competition at Chamber Music Northwest. And it's been something that I've wanted to do and only really able to do it now because of sponsorship from folks like the Bakun musical clarinet makers and some major sponsors in Portland, and because of the incredible staff we have at Chamber Music Northwest, operations and administration and marketing, who are able to put this together and make it really happen.
I wanted to call it a Clarinet Celebration because that's exactly what it is. And we'll have vendors there, clarinet makers and accessory makers and clarinet technicians. And, you know, we'll just have a really amazing clarinet geek week.
Sounds like an epic clarinet celebration. That's a ton of stuff. Wow.
Yeah, and it'll be from June 24th through the 30th. Your listeners can get all the information they could possibly want on the website for Chamber Music Northwest, which is simply cmnw.org.
Excellent. Yeah, and I've also set up a little link, clarinet.com/CMNW, and I'll put a link to both of those in the show notes there, so you can head on over and check that out. And I want to advise, anyone listening, especially younger players, these sort of events are just so worthwhile. I remember my first time going to something like this when I was still in university, and I was blown away by not only the number of things that I got to see, but the people I got to meet, the friends I still keep in touch with. So absolutely plan to get to, if not this, any sort of event like this that you have close by would be so valuable.
Absolutely. I've wanted to do this for years. It just seemed like a daunting responsibility to host one of these big events. But I've been the artistic director of the festival there in Portland for 39 years, and I'm going to retire from that position after next year in 2020, after doing 40 years. But I thought for my next to last year that I'd start kicking off things that are on my to-do list that I've always wanted to do and actually make them happen. So one of those has been to have a week that just celebrates the instrument that I love and to invite many of the artists that I so admire to come and join me and to foster young players in this competition. And we're doing it. We've been able to get the sponsorships that we need, and it's a very exciting thing. Portland is really incredible place to be in the early summer. I can't think of a better place to be for weather, and it's a really fun town to hang out in. So I hope many of your listeners will be able to come and join us.
You know, it's funny, at the beginning I said late spring and you're saying early summer. I guess technically it is early summer, but as a Canadian, I live in Calgary, and we only really get about 3 weeks of summer in August. So it just seems, to me, it seems like still spring.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Well, I've been lucky when I've been in Calgary in the winter. We get those Chinook winds a couple of times, and you wouldn't even believe that there's ever any snow there.
Yeah, you know, yesterday it was about 13 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but yeah. And so my wife and I were like, we have to go for a walk. Like, we may not get a chance again for 3 months. So I don't know what happened, but yeah. So, you know, this whole event seems focused around bringing an opportunity for young players, not only to experience music, but also compete. Why do you think it's so important that we foster the next generation of players?
Well, you know, I had lots of opportunities as a kid, but there were, you know, as a kid, I mean, as a young student, I still remember all the things that I wish were available. And I'm in a position now with many of my colleagues to try to make some of those things available to the next generation, and want to be able to do that. And I can honestly say that there are just so many gifted players now, and more so than when I was coming up, and that if there's a way to help give them opportunities, that's something that at this stage in my life and career that I'd like to be able to do.
You know, that brings me to my next question, which was, I recently turned 32. I'm also no longer eligible for these type of competitions. And you're talking a lot about how you were able to provide these opportunities for people now. And it made me start thinking, well, when should a person start thinking about fostering the next generation and not just their own career? Is it an age thing? Is it an experience thing? Is it something even young players should be doing? Like, how should we think about that?
Well, you know, that's what a great question for the ages. I've been teaching since the very earliest part of my career. And, you know, one of the things that, at least for me, has come with age and years is to realize that it's not a zero-sum game. And, you know, the notion of a competition can foster the idea that it's them or us, or you or me that's going to win. But having gone through many of those competitions in my 20s, you know, twice in Geneva and once in Munich, and all kinds of other competitions around the United States. What I take from that now, years later, is how much I developed, and how much I learned, and how much I gained from meeting other players. I was playing in Japan just a couple of years ago and saw a clarinetist that I had met in Munich, you know, a generation ago, and hadn't seen in decades. And we had become friends at the competition, and it was like an instant, you know, rekindling of an old friendship. And there are other players that I got to know that way, and so much music that I learned that I never would have if I hadn't gone to those competitions. And, you know, I know that our competition is very traditional in the repertoire, but I can guarantee that anyone who goes through the process of competing, whether or not they win a prize, is going to have a better understanding of Brahms and Mozart and Stravinsky and Debussy for going through this process. That's one of the reasons also that I wanted to give more than just one or two prizes, so that there'll essentially be 6 winners. That it's a learning experience and a collegial experience as much as it is a sporting event.
Absolutely. I think that's some great insight into that. It's funny too, because I imagine that something like this can seem really intimidating to younger students, but what advice would you give those who are considering applying and aren't quite sure if they they qualify or will achieve what they want?
Well, at this stage, they have to be comfortable with the repertoire, and we've chosen repertoire that any really serious clarinetist should be learning or have in their arsenal at almost any moment. Really, Brahms, Mozart, the Stravinsky pieces, and the Debussy Rhapsody are core repertory. So, if you're ready, put together a video. And you have a few more days and compete. If you think that you can put together your best work at this point, you should do it. And the thing that we have now with technology that we certainly didn't have when I was going to competitions as a young clarinetist is the technology to make a really first class recording and video that's available to the jurors to be able to choose who is going to become to the live auditions at almost no expense, very nominal application fee and whatever costs are associated with making a video. That's practically nothing compared to what we had to do as an American competing in Switzerland or Germany to get over there and compete at our own expense. So the other thing is that we will give the prizes. One of the things that really bothered me about the European competitions that I went to in the 1970s, they would advertise prizes and then announce after the whole competition, well, we decided not to give the first prize, or we decided not to give the first two prizes, but you can get a third prize. That kind of thing will not happen. The advertised prizes will be awarded.
Sounds like orchestral auditions today.
Oh, yeah, that's true, too. And that's one pledge that I make. If we're going to do this competition and advertise prizes, they will be awarded.
I love that. I love how you've learned and been sort of not only inspired, but also found improvements on your past experience to, allow the next generation to experience. I think that's great.
Yeah, I hope so.
So before we go, I really would be remiss if I didn't talk to you a little bit about your creative programming, which is something that you're very well known for. What are some considerations that you put into planning a recital?
There are so many considerations. How much time there'll be to prepare, who I'll be playing with, and who I'll be playing for. I program more than 100 concerts in any given year, sometimes because of the programming for Chamber Music Northwest, which has dozens of events every year that I program in, and many of them don't even have anything to do with the clarinet or recitals, and the student recitals that I deal with, helping my students select works. And so there are different criteria for programming. But when I just schedule a recital for myself, I try to play the repertoire that I love, that I've grown up with, and that, again, are the core works of the repertoire. And, in selecting the competition repertoire, I've chosen those works, the Debussy, Stravinsky, the Brahms sonatas, and of course Mozart, not recital pieces. But when I program recitals, I always try to cycle those works and combine them with new pieces, commissioned works, pieces that I am trying to learn that are not often played, but to do a mixture of those, and to sometimes play transcriptions and try to discover what works and what doesn't, trial and error, but to mix it with things that I know are genuine masterpieces of the repertoire. I don't know how else to describe it because there's so many factors involved.
Absolutely. I love the consideration for the audience, though. I mean, a lot of people just sort of put together this will be a night of music written in the last week that nobody knows and is very obscure, but you're really considering, not only what do people know, what do they expect, but also how to push the boundaries a little bit.
Sure. And as a player, each performer has, if you're programming for yourself, you want to put your best foot forward and choose repertoire that will represent your abilities. The advice, actually, the direction that I give to my students when they prepare degree recitals is to play something that you've played many times before and do it better. To play something that you've worked on but never performed, get it to the performance level, and to choose something that you've never studied. So to have those three different levels of work for an advanced student, that's something that you're totally comfortable with, that you're going to try to even get to another level, something that you've worked on extensively but have never had the experience of performing, and something that you have never touched before, that you're going to learn from the ground up.
I love that. It's founding true artistry, I think. That's great. So I have one more question here before we move on to a couple of quick listener questions and then something I call the lightning round. And this one's more of a personal nature. I've found that as the podcast has grown over the last 3 years, it seems to have also grown with me, and some of the questions are more kind of personally oriented, but I'm sure other people relate. So over the summer, my wife and I had our first child, and it has been quite the experience. And I was wondering, I know you're also a father, and if you could offer any advice for those musicians who do have kids, and as far as trying to maintain your career and practice and everything else that goes along with being a musician that starts to sort of feel like it takes the back burner a bit.
That's a great question. That's not just a question for musicians, but I remember my oldest son, the first time I played the clarinet, when he was in the room, he started to cry. So I thought, okay. Then for a while, I would practice with him on one of those backpack things. He'd fall asleep on my back, so he got used to it. But now, my wife and I have triplets who are 13 years old. And, I think most parents learn that you do things that you need to do when the kids are asleep. And so I had to find a place where I could practice that didn't wake up the kids when they were sleeping.
So did you just play very quietly, or did you find a different room? Or
I play in a different room, but honestly, I would practice when I'm on the road or between students when I'm teaching for the longest time. And then when my kids went to school, if I practiced at home, it would be when they're in school. Now, two of them are pretty serious musicians at age 13. My daughter plays the clarinet. One son plays the trumpet. So when they go up to their rooms to practice, I practice in my studio. I practice when they're in school and when I'm on the road and when I'm at school between teaching my students. Those are the prime times for me.
Do you guys play any music as a family?
Well, sometimes my kids who are musicians, they like to arrange stuff, and they have a little jazz band that they do. And so once in a while, I'll play along with them.
It's something I've yet attempted to do is to play while she's napping. So, but now that I've got this new Lumiere clarinet, it's bound to happen.
How old is she now?
6 months, so still very young.
Oh,
so she's getting into a good routine though.
Congratulations.
And thank you. I actually played bass clarinet for her a while ago, and she found that quite amusing. So that's a good sign.
Yeah, that's great.
So I've got a couple quick listener questions here, just to answer real quick. This is another one from Shane_clarinetist, and he says, "What are your thoughts on the online clarinet community?"
There are all kinds of Facebook groups and emails going around, and there are a few people that are always the ones who seem to be posting on those. And I don't participate very actively, but I really enjoy some of the things that get posted once in a while. Really historic videos and performances and repertoire, but I don't really have the time to get involved very much, or to take advantage of the things that people are always posting. Every once in a while, you'll see an old poster or an old program that gets posted, and it's really quite interesting. So, the internet really has, just like for every subject and every interest, made lots of information and resources available. And another aspect of the online clarinet community is someone like Michelle Anderson, who has developed a whole community of clarinet learners, and she presents these master classes online and has a group that travel with her as well to a number of clarinet events. And she'll be bringing a group to our celebration in Portland in June. But hers is primarily an online community. She gives clarinet lessons online and master classes and a whole series of how-to videos. And so that's another aspect that's very positive in learning and sharing how to play the instrument.
Absolutely. There's so many resources which would have been impossible years ago. I mean, Michelle Anderson, I was actually a guest on one of her clarinet nights or something like that she hosts, and it's actually kind of all over the world. I think we had people tuning in, over 100 people from all over the place, which, they're just at home. That's impossible 20 years ago, 10 years ago. It's crazy. So
it really is. Well, if any of your listeners want to get a chance to meet Michelle, I should have mentioned early on that she'll be there for the entire festival, celebration, and competition, to be on our jury, and we'll be hosting some of her online community in person at Chamber Music Northwest in Portland.
So here's another question from Jefferson_S_3740, again from Instagram. Do you have any more recordings coming up soon?
Well, yeah, as a matter of fact. Thanks for asking. I mentioned that there's a Nielsen recording that came out in the past year that has this arrangement of the Clarinet Concerto that is masterfully done by Renee Orth for a small ensemble of 8 players, reducing the entire orchestra to 8 players. And it works so beautifully. Essentially, it is the instrumentation of the Schubert octet plus a snare drum. So the solo clarinet, bassoon, horn, and then a string quintet and a snare drum. And I'm very pleased with this recording, and we've paired it with other works of Nielsen, including the Serenata in Vano, for those of you who are familiar with this really kind of funny piece, and touchingly expressive, and then just really out-and-out comedic for clarinet, horn, bassoon, and cello and bass. And the rest of the album is all clarinet and piano. There's a very early Nielsen work for clarinet and piano, but I've transcribed a pair of oboe pieces by Nielsen that work beautifully on the clarinet. And Steve Cohen, the clarinet professor at Northwestern, has transcribed a whole series of piano pieces of Nielsen called Humorous Bagatelles for clarinet and piano, and we've recorded those as well. So that for those who are familiar with the Clarinet Concerto, want to hear more Nielsen and hear this really unusual and wonderful arrangement of the concerto that is much more accessible, because you can find 8 players to play with a lot easier than you can an entire orchestra, and it really is a wonderful representation of Nielsen's music. Of course, much more so than playing it with piano, and in many ways rivals the full orchestra because of its clarity. So I hope people will listen to the Nielsen album. I have another album coming out just in the next couple of months. We're just finishing up the booklet for it right now, which is 3 new clarinet quintets that I helped commission. A new quintet by Peter Schickley, a new quintet by Richard Danielpour, and a new quintet by Aaron J. Kernis. I think they're masterpieces, and that I hope people will listen The Shikali is with the Miro String Quartet. The Aaron Kernis piece is with the Jasper Quartet, and the Daniel Poor is with the wonderful Dover String Quartet. And this has been already mastered and getting ready for release in the early spring.
Well, I hope everyone checks that out. And maybe when they do come out, send me a message and I'll be sure to send it out to my followers. That'd be great.
Please. That's great. Thank you.
Well, David, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I want to really thank you for taking the time to talk with me. Also, if anyone wants to learn more about the Chamber Music Northwest and the Clarinet Celebration and Competition coming up, you can head to clarinet.com/CMNW, or you can go to cmnw.org. And do check that out. I think it's really worthwhile attending, like I said at the beginning, and I definitely hope I think I'll be there for some of it. So if you are going to be there, maybe we'll run into each other. And if you do see me, please come up and say hi. So thank you so much, David. Was there anything else you want to add before we go today?
No, I just want to thank you for having me. This has been fun.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Clarinet Podcast. Show notes for this and all other episodes can be found at clarinet.com. While you're there, don't forget to join our email newsletter for free updates, exclusive offers, and a chance to win giveaways. Guest requests, listener feedback, and comments can be sent to feedback@clarinet.com. Special thank you to our season sponsor, Daddario Woodwinds. Don't forget to check out their new show, Don't Blow It, on Instagram, and also try a box of their new reserve clarinet reeds next time you're at the music store. The show is also brought to you by Chamber Music Northwest. With over $20,000 in prizes and world-class guest artists and vendors, their upcoming Clarinet Celebration and Competition is an event that you don't want to miss. Learn more at cmnw.org. Hosting for Clarinet is sponsored by Bakun and their new line of Lumiere clarinets, barrels, and bells. Get 10% off your next accessory purchase by using code Clarinet at bakunmusical.com. This program was produced and hosted by me, Sean Perrin, in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Music performed by Michael Lowenstern. Debate episodes co-hosted by Andrew Morrow. Audio editing by Brian Chappelles. And copy editing by Megan Taylor. You can support the ongoing production of this independently produced program by donating to our Patreon at clarinet.com/support. Supporters get early access to extended ad-free regular podcasts and exclusive access to patron-only episodes and live events. That's all for now. Be sure to tune in next time for more of what's new and neat with clarinet with the neatest people in the industry on the Clarinet Podcast.